What happens when a 6-year-old points to a judge and says, "You're my dad"? The courtroom wasn't ready for the truth. Stillness blanketed the room, a suffocating kind of silence. Every shuffle of paper, every nervous cough, reverberated as if amplified by invisible forces. The case of 6-year-old Amara Daniels had already gripped the small Lexington, Kentucky community, not because of her age alone, but because of the swirling questions surrounding her custody. On one side sat her mother, Vanessa Daniels, a woman whose past mistakes loomed large in the eyes of the law. Opposing her was the state attorney, arguing that Amara would be better off in foster care. But Amara? She wasn't like other children. Her voice carried no hesitation, no childish stammer. Instead, she spoke with wisdom, a quiet authority that made adults pause mid-breath to listen. Today, perched on the edge of her chair, her small legs swinging beneath her, she surveyed the room with wide, curious eyes that seemed to absorb everything at once. Dressed in a simple yellow dress, her tiny braids framing her face, she clutched a well-worn stuffed bunny to her chest like a shield. Judge William Harper, a man in his late 50s with neatly combed silver hair and a reputation for fairness, presided over the case. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp blue eyes fixed on Amara. Known for his unshakable composure, he rarely let emotion seep into the courtroom. Yet something about the girl's presence gnawed at his usual demeanor. The proceedings began as expected. The state attorney laid out their argument, highlighting Vanessa's history of instability. Vanessa's lawyer countered fiercely, painting her as a mother desperate to turn her life around. But then came Amara's turn to speak, and the room braced itself. The bailiff guided her to the witness stand. The soft scuff of her shoes against the polished floor echoed through the hushed space. Vanessa leaned forward in her seat, hands clasped tightly together, lips moving silently as if in prayer. Judge Harper adjusted his glasses, steeling himself to hear the child's perspective, but even he couldn't anticipate what came next. "Amara," the judge asked, his voice gentle yet firm, "do you know why you're here today?" Amara nodded, her big brown eyes locking onto his with disarming directness. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "I'm here because people don't know where I belong." The judge gave a small nod, visibly impressed by her composure. "And where do you think you belong, Amara?" She paused, weighing her words carefully. Then, with a voice that blended innocence and certainty, she answered, "With my dad." The courtroom collectively held its breath. Judge Harper tilted his head slightly, his tone even but tinged with curiosity. "Who do you believe your dad is?" Without hesitation, Amara turned her gaze, unwavering, and pointed directly at him. "You are." The silence that followed pressed down on everyone in the room, heavy and suffocating. Even the hum of the air conditioning faded into oblivion. Judge Harper sat back, his usually impassive face betraying a flicker of shock. The entire courtroom froze, waiting for what would happen next. Gasps rippled through the crowd, murmurs of disbelief and confusion spreading like wildfire. The court reporter's hands hovered above the keys, momentarily stunned by what she had just heard. Vanessa Daniels, seated at the plaintiff's table, let out an audible gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as if to stifle the shock. Meanwhile, the state attorney leaned back in their chair, their expression a mixture of skepticism and bewilderment. Judge Harper, however, remained frozen. His hand gripped the armrest of his chair as if anchoring himself to reality. His face was unreadable, but the slight twitch in his jaw betrayed the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. It was as though Amara's words had ripped open a part of his life he thought was sealed shut forever. "Amara," he began, his voice strained in a way it rarely was, "why do you think I'm your dad?" Her answer came immediately, simple and devastatingly direct. "My mommy told me. She said, when I was born, you didn't want to be around, so you went away." Clutching her stuffed bunny tighter, she added nothing more. Vanessa, now trembling, stood abruptly. "That's not true," she exclaimed, her voice cracking under the weight of the moment. "She doesn't know what she's saying." The courtroom deputy stepped forward to calm her, guiding her back into her chair as tears streamed down her face. Judge Harper took a deep breath, struggling to regain control, not only of the room but of himself. "Order," he commanded firmly, his voice regaining some of its authority. The courtroom quieted, though the tension remained thick enough to cut with a knife. All eyes were on him, waiting to see how he would respond to the little girl's claim. "Amara," he said gently, turning his attention back to her, "did your mother tell you anything else about me?" Amara nodded slowly. She said you're a judge, and that you help people. But she also said, her voice trailed off for a moment before continuing, softer now, that you never came back because you didn't love her. The words hit like a hammer blow. For a moment, it felt as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, muffling her sobs, while Judge Harper's gaze remained fixed on the little girl. His expression was unreadable, but his hands, now clasped together on the bench, trembled ever so slightly. The attorneys on both sides began whispering furiously to their clients, each trying to figure out how to navigate the bombshell that had just exploded in their midst. But all of it felt like background noise compared to the weight of Amara's words, which lingered in the air like a storm cloud threatening to break. Finally, Harper leaned forward, his voice steady but tinged with something uncharacteristically personal. Amara, what you said is very serious. I need to know, did your mother tell you this recently, or have you always known? The little girl tilted her head, as though trying to remember. She told me a long time ago, she replied. But I didn't understand until I saw you. When I came in here today, I just knew you're my dad. Her words struck a chord deep within him, one he couldn't ignore no matter how much he wanted to. Instead of letting his emotions show, he cleared his throat and turned to the attorneys, signaling that this revelation would require further examination. A tense calm settled over the room, the calm before the inevitable storm. But the undercurrent of tension was impossible to miss. The courtroom was adjourned shortly after Amara's revelation, giving everyone time to process what had just occurred. Judge Harper excused himself quickly, retreating to his chambers where the weight of her words pressed down on him like an anvil. He shut the door behind him and sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Could it be possible? Could this bright-eyed little girl really be his daughter? His mind raced back to a time he rarely revisited, his early 30s, when his career was just beginning. Ambitious and determined to climb the ladder in the legal world, relationships often took a back seat. There had been a brief, intense romance with a woman named Vanessa Daniels. Beautiful, full of life, but their paths had diverged almost as quickly as they'd crossed. She had disappeared from his life almost as soon as she entered it, and he had never looked back. Until now. The next day, Judge Harper called a closed session, a rare move that signaled the gravity of the situation. The courtroom was nearly empty, save for the attorneys, Vanessa, and Amara. The mood was somber, the air heavy with unspoken questions. Miss Daniels, Harper began, his voice firm but controlled, I need to ask you directly, is there any truth to what Amara said yesterday? Vanessa's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she shook her head. This was her moment, and she knew it. Slowly, she stood, her eyes meeting Harper's. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's true. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Harper's expression remained stoic, but the color drained from his face. Why didn't you come to me? He asked, his voice betraying a trace of hurt beneath the formality. Vanessa swallowed hard. Because you made it clear what you wanted back then. You had your career, your ambitions, and I didn't want to complicate your life. I thought I was doing the right thing. And Amara? Harper pressed, his tone sharper now. Did you think keeping her father out of her life was the right thing? Vanessa's shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. I didn't think you'd want her, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. And when things got hard for me, I didn't know how to fix it. I'm sorry. Harper leaned back, his mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, regret, and a strange, newfound sense of responsibility swirling within him. But there was no time to dwell. The focus now had to be on Amara and what was best for her. The attorneys proposed a DNA test, a logical next step to confirm the truth. Harper agreed, though the idea of waiting for the results gnawed at him. In the meantime, he ordered a temporary stay on Amara's placement in foster care, allowing her to remain with her mother until the matter could be resolved. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, legal wrangling, and quiet introspection. Harper couldn't help but wonder, what kind of father could he have been if he had known? Could he still be that father now, or was it too late? When the results finally came in, they confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. Judge William Harper was indeed Amara's biological father. The confirmation brought a mix of relief and new questions. The courtroom was now a crucible where every decision, every word, carried the weight of a child's future. But the real test was yet to come. As the emotional stakes climbed higher with each passing moment, the courtroom was packed once more, tension rippling through the crowd as the case resumed. The DNA results had ignited a storm of emotions and questions, but the hearing wasn't just about biology. It was about what kind of future Amara deserved, and who could give it to her. Every eye in the room shifted between Judge Harper, seated with his usual authority, and Vanessa, whose fragile composure threatened to crack under the weight of the moment. Vanessa was called to testify. Her lawyer guided her gently through the narrative of her life, recounting the challenges she had faced after Amara's birth, financial instability, the struggle to raise a child on her own, and the choices she made that landed her in trouble with the law. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she didn't shy away from her mistakes. "I thought I was protecting her," Vanessa said, her gaze shifting to Amara, who sat quietly beside a court-appointed guardian. "I thought if I kept her away from the chaos, she'd have a better chance." The state's attorney countered, painting a stark picture of Vanessa's shortcomings. "Miss Daniels, you've demonstrated a pattern of instability. How can you assure this court that you're capable of providing a safe, nurturing environment for your daughter now?" Vanessa hesitated, her confidence faltering. She looked at Amara again, tears brimming in her eyes. "Because she's my world," she said softly. "And I'll fight every day to prove I can be the mother she deserves." Then it was Harper's turn. Though still presiding over the case, he was now personally entangled in its outcome, a situation that blurred every line of professionalism he'd ever upheld. At his lawyer's urging, he stepped away from the bench, leaving behind the gavel for the first time in his storied career. The room seemed to freeze, every breath held as Judge Harper took the stand. Here was a man who had spent decades ensuring justice from afar, now exposed and vulnerable under the weight of his own testimony. He began to recount his story, his younger years brimming with ambition, the relentless climb up the ladder of success, and the ignorance that blinded him to Vanessa's pregnancy. "If I had known," he said, his voice cracking like fragile glass, "I wouldn't have walked away." A pause hung heavy in the air, raw emotion etched into every syllable. "I wasn't ready for a family back then, but I would have tried. I would have been there." His gaze shifted, landing on Amara, who stared back at him with wide, curious eyes, eyes that seemed to hold both judgment and hope. "And now that I know," he continued, his tone resolute, "I'll do whatever it takes to make up for the time I've lost." The cross-examination came swiftly, unrelenting. The state's attorney wasted no time cutting to the heart of the matter. "Judge Harper," they began, their voice sharp as a blade, "you've had no contact with this child for 6 years. Do you really believe stepping into her life now is in her best interest?" Harper took a deep breath, steadying himself against the weight of the question. "I don't just believe it," he replied firmly, his words echoing through the silent courtroom. "I know it. Amara deserves stability, love, and someone who will fight for her no matter what. If that means I have to prove myself every single day, then I will." The room fell silent save for the soft scratch of the court reporter's pen, capturing each word like fragments of history being written in real time. Finally, Judge Leonard Shaw, an older man with a face lined by years of bearing witness to humanity's complexities, spoke. His voice carried the gravity of someone who understood the stakes far beyond the confines of the law. "This is an extraordinary situation," he said, his tone measured yet heavy with implication. "The law prioritizes the child's welfare above all else. With that in mind, I will hear from the person this affects most." All eyes turned to Amara. She hesitated, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly, as though it were the only anchor keeping her grounded amidst the storm. The guardian knelt beside her, whispering encouragement until she gave a small nod. Slowly, she rose and approached the witness stand, her tiny frame dwarfed by the towering furniture. It was almost surreal, a child standing where adults so often bore the burden of truth. "Amara," Judge Shaw said gently, leaning forward slightly, "do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely audible, trembling like the wings of a butterfly caught in a breeze. "You're trying to figure out where I should live," she added, her innocence piercing through the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. "And where do you want to live?" Judge Shaw asked, his tone soft but firm, carrying the weight of a decision that could alter lives forever. Amara's eyes darted between Vanessa and Harper, flickering with uncertainty before settling on neither. After a moment's hesitation, she spoke. "I want to live with both of them." The courtroom rippled with surprise, murmurs breaking out despite the judge's call for order. Vanessa looked stunned, her hands pressed tightly over her mouth, while Harper's usually composed face softened with something resembling hope. But Amara wasn't finished. "But I know that's not how it works," she added, her voice tinged with wisdom far beyond her years. "I just want to feel safe and loved." Her words struck harder than any testimony or argument ever could. They were simple, pure, and cut through the tangled web of legal jargon and procedure. Yet, they left everyone grappling with one haunting question: how could they honor her request in a world bound by rules and limits? The stakes had never felt higher, and the answers remained frustratingly elusive. When the courtroom reconvened the next day, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Judge Leonard Shaw stood, preparing to deliver his verdict. This case, once a straightforward custody dispute, had evolved into something far more profound, a reflection on responsibility, redemption, and what it truly meant to be a family. "All eyes are on me now," he began, his deep voice resonating through the hushed chamber, "but my focus remains firmly on Amara. At its core, this case is about a little girl who deserves a stable, loving home. It's about balancing her need for security with the opportunity to know her father, who has only recently entered her life." He paused, letting his words settle over the room like dust after an earthquake. Every eye was glued to him, waiting for the hammer to fall. After reviewing all the evidence, hearing all the testimonies, and considering Amara's own wishes, this court has reached a decision. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white as bone. Harper sat motionless, his hands folded tightly together, betraying none of the turmoil churning within him. And Amara, too young to fully grasp the magnitude of the moment, clutched her stuffed bunny and stared up at the judge with wide, expectant eyes. "It is the court's ruling," Judge Shaw continued, his voice steady but deliberate, "that Amara Daniels will remain in the custody of her mother, Vanessa Daniels. However," he added, raising a hand to preempt any reaction, "the court also recognizes the importance of Amara developing a relationship with her biological father. Therefore, Judge William Harper is granted joint custody, with structured visitation and shared responsibilities." The courtroom erupted into hushed murmurs, the verdict rippling through the crowd like a shockwave. Vanessa let out a shaky exhale, tears streaming freely down her face. Harper's head dipped slightly, relief and determination etched into his features. But Judge Shaw wasn't done. "This decision is not an end," he emphasized, his voice firm, "but a beginning. It is a chance for two parents to set aside their past and work together in the best interest of the child who connects them. Amara deserves love and stability, and it is up to both of you to provide it." As the proceedings concluded, Harper approached Vanessa outside the courtroom. For a moment, they stood in silence, two people tethered by a complicated history now bound by something far greater. Finally, Harper extended his hand. "For Amara," he said simply. Vanessa hesitated, her emotions warring visibly across her face. Then, slowly, she took his hand. "For Amara," she echoed softly. Amara watched them, her smile radiant, clutching her bunny as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For the first time in her short life, she had both her parents by her side, and the future, however uncertain, seemed just a little brighter.